In the very heart of the United Arab Emirates, where the asphalt melts from the heat and skyscrapers reach for the clouds, an unexpected scene unfolds so more fitting for a post-apocalyptic movie. On the outskirts of Dubai, right under the scorching sun, in the dusty sands, you can see what seems like a mirage of abandoned luxury cars. Among them are Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Bentleys, and even the ultra-rare Ferrari Enzo, which once cost over $1 million. These cars are not wrecked, not destroyed, they are simply forgotten. Many of them are covered with a thick layer of sand, as if time itself decided to hide these masterpieces of the automotive industry from the world's eyes. So why did they end up here? It all comes down to the strict laws of the UAE. When expats face financial difficulties, especially during crisis years, they often leave the country in a hurry. The reason is simple. Here, debt is punishable by criminal law. Leaving everything behind, including their supercars, they flee, sometimes quite literally tossing the keys into the ignition as they go. At airport parking lots, you can find hundreds of such cars, some with notes on the windshield saying, "Sorry." There's a story about a British businessman who left his Ferrari 458 Italia and fled after learning about his impending arrest. His story is just one of thousands. And the local authorities, bogged down by years of bureaucracy, can't decide what to do with this graveyard of luxury. Curious about what happens to these cars next. Some are auctioned off for next to nothing, while others sit for years until the metal begins to give way to sand and time. But not every car abandoned in the sands was left out of fear. There are even stranger reasons worth telling about. The mystery of the Chinese supercar graveyard. In the most populous country on the planet, where innovation meets tradition, there is a place known only to a few. On the outskirts of a Chinese city, in the shadow of dense trees, dozens of luxury cars were discovered, simply rotting away in place. Among them are a Porsche Panamera, Maserati Gran Turismo, Aston Martin, and even rare Maybach models. But how did such cars end up in the forest left unused? Local bloggers were the first to raise the alarm, publishing photos of the strange graveyard. The cars were covered in moss, leaves, and mold. From the outside, it seemed as if no one had touched them for years. Local residents could only shrug, telling stories about confiscations. And indeed, it was later revealed that the cars belonged to officials and businessmen accused of corruption and economic crimes. While the court proceedings dragged on, the seized cars were left to rot without proper care. Some of them turned out to be so rare that car collectors from around the world began hunting for the exact coordinates of this place. But the Chinese government is keeping the situation under control. Access to these cars is restricted, and most of the cases remain without a public conclusion. Why the government neither sells nor restores these cars remains a mystery. Perhaps the answer lies in policy to destroy the symbols of luxury belonging to those who abuse their power for personal gain. But this is not yet the most shocking story of abandoned luxury. A royal collection left to rot. When it comes to wealth, it's hard to imagine anyone more extravagant than the Sultan of Brunei. His name is shrouded in legend, from gilded palaces to airplanes with marble bathtubs. But few people know that part of his immense automotive fortune has been forgotten. We're talking about more than 2,000 cars, many of which now sit gathering dust unused. This collection includes exclusive models found nowhere else. Special edition Ferraris, limited run McLarens, and Aston Martin prototypes. Among them are the Bugatti EB110, the ultra-rare Bentley Dominator, and many other cars, each of which could be the highlight of a major automotive museum. The reason for their abandonment is both simple and absurd. There were just too many cars. Some of the vehicles ended up in storage hangars, while others were left in semi-ruined garages on the outskirts of the capital. Without proper care, they became covered in dust, the tires cracked, and the leather interiors began to deteriorate from the humidity. For many years, access to the collection was restricted, but thanks to photos leaked online, the world learned that even the most unique cars can be forgotten. And in this case, it wasn't a lack of money that was to blame, but rather an excess of it. But sometimes a car's abandonment isn't connected to power or wealth, but to far more criminal motives. The buried Ferrari in Los Angeles. One day, in the late 70s, workers in Los Angeles were digging a hole in the backyard of a residential house. What they discovered shocked even the police. The roof of a Ferrari was sticking out of the ground. As it turned out, it was a Ferrari Dino 246 GTS, a rare and expensive model even back then. Someone had buried it whole. The investigation revealed that the car had supposedly been stolen and insured for a substantial amount. It was later discovered that the owners had staged the theft to collect the insurance money and had buried the car in a friend's yard. A few years passed, the ground became covered with grass, and the Ferrari was forgotten. The car was dug out of the ground, and despite the corrosion and dirt, it was restored. Today, this car is still around, takes part in exhibitions, and has become a symbol of automotive scams. Amazingly, this is not an isolated case. There are cars that are hidden not underground, but in crumbling buildings right in the center of a metropolis. An abandoned Lamborghini in Chicago, In one of Chicago's industrial zones, a dust-covered Lamborghini Murcielago was accidentally discovered in the ruins of an old auto repair shop. The owner of the shop had died long ago, there were no heirs, and the building came under the care of the city. But when a new generation of city workers decided to inspect the property, they found a car inside that was once worth nearly $400,000. At first glance, it looked like the find of the century, Alcantara upholstery, original rims without any damage. But the excitement didn't last long. Experts determined that it was a Kit Kat replica based on a Pontiac Fiero, perfectly styled to look like a Lamborghini. However, the story doesn't lose its value. Someone spent years and tens of thousands of dollars to create a fake supercar only to leave it rotting in a locked workshop. But in the next story, we're not talking about a fake, but about real millions hidden under a layer of dust. A French barn full of treasures. In the west of France, in the shadow of a dense forest, stood an unremarkable old barn. Its owner, a modest collector named Roger Bayon, passed away in the late 2000s, leaving behind little public memory. But after his death, his heirs decided to sell the property and open the door to a forgotten automotive paradise. Inside, beneath layers of dust and cobwebs, stood more than 100 cars extremely rare, antique and luxurious. This collection included a Ferrari 250 GTI California Spider, a Talbot Lago, a Bugatti Type 57, a Maserati A6G, and many other models, each of which could have been the crown jewel of any automotive museum. The Ferrari 250 GTI alone was sold at auction for more than $15 million. Why was the collection forgotten? In his youth, Roger began collecting cars with the dream of creating a private museum. But as the years went by, his funds ran out, and at some point he simply stopped taking care of them. The barn was locked up, and only decades later did the cars see the light of day again. Each of these cars carried not only luxury, but also the mark of its era, becoming a monument to human dreams and missed opportunities. But what about cars abandoned not because of time, but because of stubbornness and personal quirks? Million-dollar cars in the forests of Georgia. In the middle of a forest in the American state of Georgia lies one of the most mysterious car graveyards. Here, among the trees and tall grass, dozens of classic cars rust away: Buick, Packard, Cadillac, and even a Hudson Hornet. Some of them were manufactured in the 1930s and 1940s. True relics of their era, each worth tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars at auction. The owner of this collection, an eccentric collector named Walter, devoted his entire life to searching for and restoring rare cars. But at some point, he decided to simply leave them in the forest. He claimed that in this way, he wanted to unite metal and nature, to create an art object. Walter refused to sell or give away the cars, even when he was offered astronomical sums. After his death, his heirs found themselves at an impasse. Most of the cars had long since turned into piles of rust. However, even in this state, collectors come to see this surreal place, like an open-air museum, only one built without tickets or walls. Sometimes to see a million, you just need to look behind the trees. But next time, we'll open the door to a mansion that keeps its secrets a bit more quietly. Abandoned BMWs in a $1.5 million mansion. In the suburbs of Toronto, in a quiet neighborhood, there stood a mansion valued at $1.5 million. The house looked abandoned. The lawn was scorched, the paint was peeling, and the windows were broken. But when the authorities, concerned about the state of the property, went inside, they found something unexpected. In the garage stood two rare BMWs, including the legendary E34 M5. One of the cars was covered in a layer of dust, while the other was almost completely overgrown with mold. Inside the house, they also found a collection of vinyl records, antique furniture, and dozens of strange personal notes. It all looked as if the owner had simply vanished. Later, it turned out that the owner of the house had emigrated without telling either friends or the authorities. He simply left everything behind the house. The furniture, the cars, the reasons for his departure remain unknown to this day. But there are all sorts of rumors, from fleeing deaths to mental health issues. All of this gives the story a mystical touch, as if someone simply vanished, leaving behind a fragment of time. But sometimes luxury is abandoned not out of fear or illness, but simply because of plain laziness. The Beverly Hills Supercar Graveyard. Even on the sunny streets of Beverly Hills, you can find places where millions lie gathering dust. One such case is the story of a mansion where a Ferrari Testarossa, a Rolls-Royce Corniche, a Jaguar XJ 220, and several other cars were found in the yard. All of them are covered in leaves, with sunken tires, and some have broken windows. Local residents claim that the owner of the mansion was a reclusive millionaire who was obsessed with collecting. But one day, he simply left. No announcements, no removal of property. Years later, the house was taken to court for unpaid taxes. And that's when the details came to light. The cars were registered to a company that had long since ceased to exist. It was legally impossible to sell them. No one could even enter the property without special permission. All this time they continue to deteriorate, quietly, with no one watching. These stories are a reminder of how easy it is to lose even the most valuable things if you forget about them for just a couple of years. But there are cars whose fate ended up in the hands of history itself, when production stopped and then someone forgot to close the doors. Abandoned Bugattis in Italy. In northern Italy, in the Emilia-Romagna region, there is an old industrial area where one of Bugatti's bases was once located. In the early 2000s, the company used this building as a warehouse and showroom. After the brand's restructuring, the building was closed and forgotten. When years later explorers and enthusiasts broke in, they discovered something incredible. In the dusty halls stood unfinished Veyron bodies, interior components, wheel rims, and even partially completed car bodies. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dirt and cobwebs. Since the building belonged to a third party, legally no one could touch these remnants. But the photos leaked onto the internet and went viral. The brand itself made no comment on the discovery. Car enthusiasts around the world debated whether these were truly remnants of production or a well-orchestrated hoax. Whatever it was, the sight was mesmerizing modern symbols of engineering perfection, covered in the dust of oblivion. And this isn't even the strangest place where you can find rusting luxury. Abandoned cars in the forests of Europe, somewhere on the border between Belgium and France, hidden in the hills, a small village car graveyard was known for a long time only to the locals. Here, right in the middle of a dense forest, dozens of vintage cars were hidden. Morris Minor, Volkswagen Beetle, Citroën DS, and even a rare pre-war Mercedes-Benz. It all looked as if the owners had simply stopped their cars and walked away. Forever. Local legends claim that this was an improvised parking lot for American soldiers after World War II. The soldiers couldn't take the cars back with them and left them here. However, it was later discovered that most of the vehicles had been brought into the forest in the 1960s and 1970s by a local scrapper who hoped to create a junkyard or a museum. But the idea failed, and the cars were left to rot. All of this created a striking sight. Trees grow through the car bodies, branches wrap around the steering wheels, and moss covers the hoods. A true open-air gallery of oblivion. And although most of the cars are beyond restoration, every shot from this place is like a still from a film about how history disappears in silence. But what may be even more shocking is not that the cars are forgotten, but that they are hidden inside an ordinary garage. Abandoned cars in a garage in the UK. In one of London's quiet suburbs, on the grounds of an unremarkable residential neighborhood, an abandoned garage stood for many years. Its doors were locked, the windows were covered, and no one had seen the owner since the early 90s. The neighbors assumed the garage was empty. Everything changed when the city authorities seized the property for unpaid taxes. When the workers opened the doors, everyone froze. Inside stood dusty yet surprisingly well-preserved classic cars, including an Aston Martin DB6, a Bentley S3, and several Jaguars. Some models were covered with only a thin layer of dust, while others had already started to rust in places. But the overall scene seemed surreal. It was later discovered that the owner had been an automotive engineer who collected and restored cars as a hobby. He died alone, leaving no heirs, and the garage was simply forgotten. Finds like this are rare but not unique. More and more often, abandoned garages are becoming time capsules, holding incredible surprises. But sometimes, a forgotten car collection might not be hidden in London, but in some American mansion. Abandoned cars in a mansion in the USA. In Pennsylvania, among the hills and deserted highways, there was an old colonial-style mansion. Its windows were boarded up with plywood, and the walls were covered in mold. For years, it stood empty until it was bought by an investment company. And during the inspection of the building, an incredible photo was taken. In the underground garage beneath the mansion stood a Cadillac Eldorado, a Buick Riviera, and even a DeLorean DMC-12, the iconic car from Back to the Future. All the cars were covered in dust and mold, but they didn't look completely destroyed. It turned out that the former owner of the house was a collector. After going bankrupt in the 90s, he left all his property behind and disappeared, avoiding debts and legal battles. The garage was locked and hadn't been opened for decades. Experts who inspected the mansion claimed that the space perfectly protected the cars from moisture, so their restoration was possible. The story quickly spread across the internet, and the car soon became the subject of a fierce auction among collectors. But not all cars end up in such cozy shelters. Some are left alone to face the wild. Abandoned cars in the forests of Canada. In the north of Ontario province, where winter lasts most of the year, one of the most unusual car collections was discovered among the snow-covered forests. Here, right between the trees and thickets of bushes, dozens of classic cars stood. Chevrolet Bel Air, Ford Thunderbird, Dodge Charger. Their bodies were covered in moss, the glass cracked from the frost, but many parts were surprisingly well preserved. At first, it was believed that this was the work of an enthusiast who wanted to create a forest museum. But later it turned out, the landowner used the area as a storage site, gradually dragging cars there from different places. After his sudden death, everything was left as it was. Locals consider this place to be cursed. They say that at night in the fog you can hear the creak of opening doors and smell old gasoline. In fact, it is a unique open-air museum that doesn't require tickets, but every visit feels like a journey through time. However, perhaps the harshest fate befell the cars left among the dry sands and scorching sun. Abandoned cars in the deserts of Australia. The Australian outback holds many mysteries. One of them is the forgotten cars, rusting in the middle of the desert. In the area north of Alice Springs, dozens of abandoned Holdens, Ford Falcons, and even imported models like Mercedes-Benz and Alfa Romeo have been found. All are scattered across the territory of an old mining settlement. Once this place was bustling with life, mining, temporary workers, and active logistics. But when the mines closed, the population left, abandoning their cars right on the sand. Because of the climate, rust quickly ate away at the metal, and the wheels sank into the sand. Some cars are half buried by dunes, others are stripped beyond recognition. Australian researchers often come across such graves of machinery. These are grim monuments to an era when everything was abandoned as soon as the profit disappeared. And perhaps it is these stories about the most valuable metal, which turned out to be unwanted by anyone, that clearly show even millions under the hood can't save from oblivion. The ending of these 15 stories is united by one thing. No amount of money, brands, or ambition can protect against time and indifference. Abandoned machines become not just scrap metal, but silent witnesses to human passions, mistakes, and forgotten hopes.